Welcome to the Daily Word, verse by verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we study the book of Revelation. Keep in mind, I'm using the Holman Christian Standard Bible, so if you're using a different translation, the read is different, but the message is the same. Okay, we're going to pick up our study in chapter 2. Now, we're studying Jesus' message to the 7 churches. These were 7 contemporary churches of that day, but they were also 7 different kinds of churches, denoting certain spiritual conditions that existed in those 7 churches. And those churches are represented throughout time, throughout the generations in the time. If we were to go around the world today, we would find these 7 different kind of churches existing in Christianity today. And so the message is relevant. Now, Jesus also, what is interesting, he refers to all 7 churches as his own church because his people are involved in these churches. He also says that he knows the church and that he is present among and in the midst of these churches. Now, you also should note that these churches lived under the Roman Empire. So the conditions were, on the one hand, the Roman Empire sought wisdom and knowledge, philosophy. Yet on the other hand, they were extremely carnal. They were extremely pagan. They had beliefs in many pagan gods. The culture itself was immoral, full of sin, sexual sins. It dominated the culture. And this is what the Christian, the new faith, the new religion of Christianity was facing as they were growing and expanding into the Roman Empire. Now, verse 12 it says, "Write to the angel of the church of Pergamum, the one who has the sharp, double-edged sword says, I know where you live, where Satan's throne is. And you are holding on to my name and did not, I'm sorry, let me read verse 13 again. I know where you live, where Satan's throne is. And you are holding on to my name and did not deny your faith in me, even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness who was killed among you, where Satan lived." Now it's interesting, Jesus mentions Satan's name twice. Of course, Satan, that's one of his surnames. The other surname is the devil. But it comes from Lucifer. Now, Lucifer was the most powerful, greatest angel that God had created. He's called the anointed cherubim. And then sin was found in him. And that's probably one of the biggest mysteries is, where did the sin come from? Same thing with Adam. Adam was created and it's perfect, but he sinned. And why? But at any rate, Satan rebelled against God, became conceited and prideful, and he drew a third of the angels with him. Now, as a result, what we find in the course of humanity is these pagan religions were always, if you look at it from a spiritual root, okay, who Satan then stirs up as an anti-religion against God. And so none was better expressed in the Roman Empire. And as he says here, where Satan lives. Now, Paul had experienced this in the 19th chapter of Acts when he was accused of trying to get rid of the worship of the great goddess Diana. And the whole city's economy was built upon this worship. And as a result of that, a huge riot erupted where Paul and them was almost killed. That they barely escaped that riot. Well, in this case, there was a martyr. And of course, even as we move on in time, the next 2 centuries, there would be outbursts of persecution against the church where thousands of Christians were martyred for their faith. And so here, this Antipas was martyred for his faith. And then as Jesus says, where Satan dwells. Verse 14. But I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to place a stumbling block in front of the Israelites, to eat meat sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality. Now, we see the continual theme of sexual immorality and also eating meats or meals that are dedicated to pagan worship. Paul dealt with that in Corinthians in the 6th chapter. So, if verse 15, in the same way, you have those who hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Therefore repent, otherwise I will come to you quickly and fight against him with the sword of my mouth. Now, the story of Balaam is found in the 12th chapter, not the 12th chapter, in the book of Numbers. I believe it's maybe 14. But anyway, in the book of Numbers, and he was a flim-flam man that the king Balak figured he had a reputation for being spiritual. And so the king said, if I can hire him to curse Israel, because they were terrified of Israel. They had heard what God had did to Egypt. And so they were terrified. However, they didn't change their sinful ways. They didn't humble themselves before God. And so he figured, if I can destroy my enemies, and in his his silliness, he thought he can hire Balaam to curse. Well, God turned that around, and Balaam couldn't curse Israel because God wouldn't allow him. God said, you're going to speak words of prophecy over my people, words of good. Well, that incensed Balak because he had hired Balaam to curse Israel. And then he said to them, he said, well, your God, or this God, has stopped you from reaping all of this great reward I was going to give you. And Balaam was a very greedy man. So Balaam told him, well, I can't prophesy bad because God won't let me. But he did say, look, he came up with this way to trip up Israel. And so they fell into sexual sin, and they fell into worshiping the pagan gods, and the judgment fell on them. Now, Jesus is saying, you have them who hold to this doctrine. You are allowing them into your church. And that's really what the biggest complaint here. So that you have these people who are in your church teaching these things side by side. In verse 17, he says, anyone who has an ear should listen to what the Spirit says to the churches. And I will give the victor some of the hidden manna, and I will also give him a white stone, and on that stone a new name inscribed that no one knows except the one who receives it. Now verse 18, write to the angel of the church of Thyatira, the Son of God, the one whose eyes are like fiery flame, whose feet are like fine bronze, says. Now this denotes a kind of sternness, the fierceness in his sight, a piercing stare. I know your works, your love, faithfulness, service, and endurance. Your last works are greater than the first, but I have this against you. You tolerate this woman, the woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, and teach and deceive my slaves to commit sexual immorality and to eat meat sacrificed to idols. Now, this woman Jezebel is a pseudonym, and oftentimes you see that God is using this term to denote a characteristics. So obviously he's not referring to the original woman of Jezebel. If you go back into the Old Testament, in the book of Kings and Chronicles, Jezebel was married to the wicked king Ahab. And she was really the power behind Ahab. She ruled and she led the people in a pagan, sinful way. In fact, she had over 800 false prophets of Baal. So, oftentimes people think of Jezebel as a harlot, but she wasn't a harlot. She was a woman of power. She was a bossy woman. Excuse me. She was a bossy woman. And again, as I said, she was the real power behind Ahab. But again, the bigger sin here is that he says, you're tolerating this woman. Why is this woman in your church teaching? Okay. Verse 21. I gave her time to repent, but she does not want to repent of her sexual immorality. Look, I will throw her into a sick bed, and those who commit adultery with her into great tribulation, unless they repent of her practices. and I will kill her children with a plague, and then all the churches will know that I am the one who examines mind and heart. And I will give to each one of you according to your works. And I say to the rest of you in Thyatira, who do not hold to this teaching, and who haven't known the deep things of Satan, as they say, I do not put any other burden on you, but hold on to what you have until I come. The one who is victorious and keeps my works to the end, I will give him the authority over the nations. So he pronounces a stiff and severe punishment and judgment on this church if they do not repent, and in particular on this woman or women like her or people like her. Now it's interesting to note that a lot of times people will say how severe God is, but ignore the fact that God said, I gave her a chance to repent. And this is going to be something that's throughout this book that we're going to see as far as judgment. While the severity of God's judgment is black, it is frightening, but notice people are they're not repenting of their sins. So another thing is, notice that Jesus is projecting beyond the local church here by saying, but hold on until I come. So he's speaking to the people of God and to those people of this kind of church. Hold on to the real faith until I come. People mind that here's a good example of something. For nearly 15 centuries of church history, everybody was Catholic. Now, to me, the Catholic Church, a few of these churches could be rolled up into that message to the Catholic Church, and especially during that time, and certainly during the day. All right, we'll pick it up in chapter 3 in the next video, so I'll see you then.